Bob, we want to get right into your tremendous story. You saw God do a miracle in your family's life. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. So it was November of 1992. My wife, Karen, was 22 weeks pregnant. My son, 2-year-old Andrew, we're all together just playing in the family room one morning. Karen left the room, came back in a minute later and said there was just some blood. So I said, well, why don't we head over to the doctor to do a quick check? And she called, went over that afternoon. The nurse took a look at her and said, Karen, you look great. Are your weights real good? Why don't we just hook you up to the monitor, see how things are going? So she did, and she said, she kind of stopped and said, it looks like you may be having contractions. Are you feeling that? And Karen said, no. She said, let's get the doctor in. So the doctor came in, did a quick exam and said, okay, so you are having contractions. You've begun to dilate. Let's go in my office, sit down for a minute. I want to talk to you. So we went in and he said, look, it looks like this baby is going to be born within a week. We'll try to stop it, but I got to be honest, it doesn't look good. And the baby most likely will not be born alive. So we were just shocked, but he said, quick, go right to the hospital. They'll be waiting for you. I'll join you. We'll try to stop this, slow it down. So we got there and he, did what he could. Long story short, 2 days later, Karen's water broke and we're in the delivery room and praying and hoping, at least please let her be born alive. Although we were being told that wasn't going to happen. So the baby was born alive, but she was the smallest thing I'd ever seen. She could fit in your hand. We found out that day she weighed 450 grams, just under a pound, but she was alive. And she was whisked away by nurses and surrounded by machines. And a neonatologist came over to Karen and said, how are you? Karen said, I'm doing fine. How's the baby? She goes, well, your baby's very weak. We're keeping her heart and lungs going with machines. She can't breathe. She's under a pound. What we're going to do now is we're going to give her to you to hold, keep her warm as she passes on. And we were shocked. I just blurted out, you're kidding. You're not even going to try. And she said, no, babies like this don't make it. But we insisted on intervention. She said, okay, I'll take her down at your direction. So they whisked her away to the NICU. And later that night, I was in the NICU and I met with the doctor again. And at this point, the doctor said, well, she's still not breathing on her own. She's getting 100% oxygen. And then she went through a litany of things that were bad. But she said she is a fighter. She's hanging in, and we just have to keep praying. So at that point, I loved this doctor, or before I was not too happy with her. And, I was praying, but they were prayers almost like wishes in the air. I went to church, but I was not really a strong believer. God was not a big part of my life. I was the kind of guy I felt like whatever came up, I could take care of it. Whatever I wanted to happen, I could make happen. But here I was, completely helpless, in the right place with the right doctors, but they're telling me it's not going to happen. So we were discharged 2 days later. It was still all touch and go. The baby was still not breathing on her own. I knelt by my bed and I was praying, but it wasn't feeling a connection. I wasn't feeling peace. And I got up and I looked out the back window and all of a sudden fragments of 2 verses dropped into my head. And I wasn't looking for verses. I didn't study the Bible at all. But there they were. I must have heard them enough times. And one was to have the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. And the other fragment was to ask and you'll be answered, to knock. And so I knew these were important. And so, but I didn't know where to find them. I had one Bible in the house and I was leafing through it. I couldn't find them. I called a friend of mine who was at the seminary, so I figured he must know. And he did, and he pointed me to those verses, and I found them in the Bible, and I began to read them, and I began to pray over those verses, and I just said, these are promises from God, and I'm claiming them now. And then I began to feel peace, finally. Faith, our daughter is named Faith, and she ended up in the hospital for 4 months. But now, she's 28 years old, 3-sport athlete. She's a search engine optimizer for website developer. She's done very well. And, all glory to God for that.
Wow. Wow. Bob, that is so fantastic to see Faith as an adult there. But God took you on a spiritual journey through this necessity of prayer during this time. And many families have probably maybe not quite had the experience that you had with your baby's life being so in the balance. But you share in the book about that journey. You and your wife, both independently and then together, just continually seem to be drawn into closer and closer relationship during this time with the Lord during this time.
Yeah, for the first time, I began to look to the Bible for help, for comfort. In fact, it was also at this time that I discovered Christian radio. I was driving back from the hospital one night, and it was really dark and late, and I was just flipping through the dial, and all of a sudden I had a Christian and began to, listen. And, they were quoting C.S. Lewis, and I was a teacher, and up to that point, to me, C.S. Lewis, wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. I didn't know that he wrote any, profound Christian books. I didn't even know there were Christian bookstores. That's how out of the loop I was. And when I looked them up in the phone book, I found there was like 5, within like an 8-mile radius of the house. So I ended up at a Christian bookstore wanting to buy everything I saw. So when they say, you're hungering for the word, for the first time in my life, I really felt that.
I thought it was great in the book you shared about walking into the Christian bookstore and being like overwhelmed by the Bible room, just so many different Bibles. But I love the hunger that you had. Yeah.
And Bob, I just want to ask you, what would you say to that one person right now that maybe they've been in your shoes, like they are a parent and their child is in the ICU, or that grandparent that doesn't know what's going to happen or really is struggling with faith? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I would say be encouraged and turn to God. He wants us to come to him so he can show his power and his glory. I just felt God's presence so many times in the NICU. And the other part that people can take away is be part of your child's care. We were scared to even touch our daughter at first. But the nurses continued to encourage us, saying that the research shows the more you interact with the child, even just talking to them, the better they actually do health-wise.
That's really good, Bob. And I just like one of the quotes that you had from the book about at the end, and just talking about your whole journey of faith. And you said this quote, "Faith survival emphasized to me that God does most of his work, even most of his miracles these days, not through incredible supernatural phenomena like burning bushes or parting seas, but through his people and their everyday actions, big and small." That was so true in your life.
Yeah, the nurses, again, really made that clear to us, because I was just thanking them up and down for what they did. God really used those nurses and doctors. But one of the nurses reminded me, he used you guys too.
That is so true. He uses all of us. Bob, thank you so much for just sharing your testimony and your story and the miracle of faith. It's just so amazing to just see that she went from that little one, found out she's into a beautiful young woman. Thank you so much for joining us today.